The world is infinitely complex, and although I don't like to say it because there are situations when reality and morality cannot be more clear, and someone starts saying to you, well, we don't know the whole truth, there is another side of the story. But there are opposite situations when the whole complexity of the relationship of taxes and economic growth is simplified to the phrase, you just need to lower taxes and this will certainly cause incredible economic growth. The fewer the taxes, the better. And this is really when everything isn't that simple. It's not 100% false, it's just the reality is much more complicated than this. Myth number 1. Rich people are job creators. The statistics show that most jobs are actually created by small businesses. But can we really say the word created here? It is interesting how cause and effect relationships work. When you turn on the tap and water flows, you can say that it flows because you turned on the tap. Or you can say water flows because the pumping station is working. You can say the real reason is that there are people who work at the pumping station. Or the reason why water flows is because the power plant is operating, which provides electricity to the pumping station that pumps water through the sewer. And you can say the real reason why water flows is the fact that there are laws of gravity. You can turn on the tap and water will not flow if, for example, the pumping station isn't working. But let's get back to the question of who creates jobs. Businessmen alone are simply not enough to create jobs. A business will not work without, for example, the demand for the product or service. If there are not enough consumers, then the business will not work, and no jobs could be created. That is, we can say that consumers create jobs. Consumers must have money, that is, they must have another job. That is, we can say that jobs create other jobs. You also need to create money and make people trust the currency to make people use it. For a business to work, you also need laws and order. That is, you need police officers, courts, legal system that can provide some guarantee that the store you open will not be just robbed in the first day. That is, the state is needed for business, and we can say that the state creates jobs. So the point is that the confluence of many circumstances creates jobs. Businessmen are only one of them. The second myth that I have already mentioned, the less taxes, the better it is for economic growth. The relationship of taxes and economic growth is a complex thing, and no research will help us to determine what exactly is better for the economy, high taxes or low taxes, because for such study we need two absolutely identical countries. The most developed countries in the world, such as Denmark and Finland, have one of the highest tax rates in the world. But we don't know what these countries would be like if the tax rates were lower. The real question is how efficiently the state manages money and how efficiently businesses manage money. We need investments in education for the development of human capital, so there will be competent specialists. We need people to be healthy for labor productivity, so we need to invest in healthcare. We need investments in infrastructure, roads, railways, ports and airports, which will ensure effective movement of goods and people. We need an effective legal system that will protect businesses from criminals. It's all done thanks to taxes. Yes, if taxes are lowered, it is obvious that businesses will have more money and they can invest additional profits in the development. But some businesses will not use money effectively. We have seen how large companies in America spend years of profits on buybacks, and some companies even take loans in order to buy back. This is insane. So ask yourself what is better, if Apple, for example, spends another couple of tens of billions of dollars on a buyback or pay more taxes. And of course, not only companies can flush money down the toilet, some governments can also waste money. And if there is no decentralization of power, a system of checks and balances in the country, but there is a lot of oil money, the government can do absolute madness. When you hear examples that there was a situation when increasing or decreasing taxes led to higher budget revenue and higher economic growth, you need to remember that this economic growth could be caused by different factors, and we don't know how it would be if the tax rate was different. It is necessary to take into account the features of the situation and the economy of a particular country. What works in one country would not work in another one. Also, there is a big difference between short-term and long-term effects of higher and lower taxes. Reducing taxes during economic crisis can help to survive it easier in the short term, but in the long term, underinvestment to infrastructure, healthcare and education will have negative impact. So it is complicated. But there are a few points that most economists agree. During economic crisis, it's beneficial to lower taxes. During strong economic growth, it's beneficial to raise taxes. Too low or too high tax rate are ineffective. Myth number 3. The exchange rate between two currencies is an indicator of the situation in the country's economy. The exchange rate actually shows only some insights into the economy of countries, but it is not a comprehensive and objective indicator of the economy. Over the past 5 years, the Turkish lira has lost 80% of its value against the dollar. The reason for this is that the loss of confidence in the policy of the Turkish central bank and accordingly in the Turkish lira. Instead of raising the rate in order to stop inflation, the Turkish central bank decided to argue with economists and began to lower the rate. And of course, this only accelerated inflation. In October 2022, inflation peaked at 86%, and now inflation is declining year over year. In January, it was 58%. And even with this currency crisis and all the crazy things that the Central Bank of Turkey is doing, Turkey's GDP in constant prices has been growing all these years, as if everything is okay. Inflation is always higher in countries where the economy is growing rapidly than in highly developed countries where the economy either doesn't grow at all or grows very slowly. This is fine. Rapid economic growth means high inflation. And this is quite logical that if in India, for example, cumulative inflation over the past 10 years has been significantly higher than inflation in America, then the Indian rupee has depreciated more than the American dollar. That's all what the exchange rate of the dollar and the Indian rupee tells us. In 2022, the Japanese yen has lost some of its value against the dollar. The only reason is that the US Federal Reserve has been raising interest rates the whole year, while the Japanese bank has left the rate negative. Accordingly, American bonds that are bought with dollars have become more profitable than bonds that are bought with yen, simply because American bonds bring at least some profit, while Japanese ones don't. Japan didn't have such a big spike of inflation as America had. Only now inflation in Japan has reached 4% year over year. And perhaps this is just a side effect of the slight devaluation of the Japanese yen. Japan is a very developed country, and the Japanese economy has not been growing for several decades. And at the same time, inflation there has been basically zero all these years. And by the way, I have a question. Is it bad to have a non-growing economy if it's already a very developed country? I think no. Why do people need endless economic growth? But this is a topic for a separate video. Another example is the Russian ruble. After the introduction of unprecedented sanctions against Russia, the Russian ruble began to get more expensive. It was a very unusual situation. Russian oil continued to be sold even though with a discount. The prices of oil were high. In addition, administrative restrictions were introduced on the use of foreign currency deposits, various restrictions for non-residents who are unable to sell rubles, purchase other currencies and withdraw money. It became impossible for residents to sell their securities. A tax was introduced for residents on purchase of non-cash currency, in particular at exchange trading. The central bank set an extremely high rate of 20%. Russian imports fell significantly while people mostly stayed at home and didn't travel to other countries to spend rubles due to flight restriction and sanctions. Basically, oil revenues were very high. The key rate was very high, and the need and ability to buy dollars for rubles fell significantly. Out of all this, there is nothing good for the economy, except for high oil revenues. Any country needs imports in the same way as exports. This is especially true for goods that the country does not produce. Imagine how limited the economic growth of a country will be if it doesn't manufacture its own computers, nor import computer parts from other countries, although in this case some kind of black market will still work, ways to bypass sanctions, the so-called parallel imports. Moreover, such an expensive ruble makes oil exports much less profitable. Now the ruble has begun to depreciate due to restrictions on Russian oil prices, which have led to a decrease in the inflow of foreign exchange earnings from oil exports. As you can see, the situations are all very different. And in all of these situations, the exchange rate only shows certain insights into the economy, but not the situation as a whole. To learn about the approximate situation in the economy as a whole, you need to look comprehensively at different indicators. Myth number 4. The tobacco sector benefits the economy. Tobacco lobbyists say the tobacco industry employs a significant number of people, including those involved in production, distribution and retail. A huge tobacco taxes bring in a lot of money for governments. But the point is that thinking should not stop here. We need to ask ourselves questions about how people will spend money and work if they didn't smoke. Everyone knows that smoking is bad for health, and it is quite logical to assume that smoking leads to a decrease in labor productivity. It is also logical to assume that money spent on tobacco could be spent on something else. A 1990 study in the UK showed a positive effect on overall employment when people quit smoking. If smokers spend their money on recreation and luxury goods instead of cigarettes, then this will offset the state's losses in excise taxes through taxes on goods and services, and also stimulate the growth of employment in these areas. In general, tobacco production is a small share of the economy. Other stages of production are highly automated. In most countries, the number of workers in the sphere was about 1% of the total share of the population employed in any kind of production. The development of the tobacco industry and the increase in the number of smokers lead not only to a slowdown in labor productivity, but also to a slowdown in demographic growth. The nicotine-dependent part of the population is prone to increased morbidity. Smoking women jeopardize the ability to bear healthy offspring. The popularity of smoking entails not only loss of productivity of the population, but also losses from wildfires. Reducing the number of smokers leads to an increase in the average life expectancy of the population, reduces the cost of treating diseases associated with smoking. Smokers are forced to visit doctors more often and spend more money from health insurance funds. Myth number 5. Banks benefit from the key rate hike. In theory, the higher the key rate, the greater the difference between lending and deposit rates. But this is all just theory. As they say, in theory there is no difference between practice and theory, but in practice there is. In practice, things aren't that simple. First, the cycle of key rate hike reduces demand for loans and leads to a slowdown in economic activity. Second, raising rates makes it harder for banks to raise capital and finance their activities, which negatively affects their profitability. And most importantly, financial institutions, not only banks as a rule, take short-term loans and issue long-term loans, earning on the spread between the interest rates of long-term and short-term loans. If the rates rise but the market expects the rates to fall in the long run, as they do now, there is an inversion of long-term and short-term yields. Such an inversion can, on the contrary, lead to losses since short money is quite expensive. I talked more about this business model in a video about AGNC stock. The good news is that bankers are not fools, and therefore the average loan repayment period in the most cases doesn't exceed 5 years. You can just look at the reports of American banks for the last quarters. Net income didn't change much, although revenue has increased. That's all for today. Thank you for watching or listening to this video. I really hope it was interesting to you.